Hey, Stewart's Chapel, this is Brother Don Pierson and Don Camps, and we're at Thumper and Alley Pig's house, and we appreciate their hospitality. And this is Saturday's devotion. We're in 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. Probably one of those verses is going to be familiar to you. The other one maybe not so, but one of them I think you're going to be familiar with it. Just even if you may not have known where it was, you probably heard it enough that once I start reading, you can probably finish it. 1 Peter 5, 8 and 9. Be sober. In other words, be fully alert. Be vigilant. Have your eyes wide open, looking everywhere. Because your adversary, the one who seeks to destroy you, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world. So this devil is like a roaring lion, walking, looking, seeking, and we're to be ready for him. Have you ever been hunted? I mean, really hunted. Actually, I wrote down 5 times where I became very much aware that I was being hunted. Now, that doesn't count the times when I didn't know. There was actually a time when a hawk, I was up in a deer stand. I didn't write that one down. I was up in a deer stand, and this hawk all of a sudden came and was flying straight for me, and I thought he was just going to get me. He saw some movement. He was ready for the prey, and all of a sudden he veered off, and he landed literally on a branch just right there next to me, trying to figure out what I was, this fully cameled man. No, I think the first time that I was aware I was being hunted was in North Carolina. I had gone to White Lake. My father and mother lived there on White Lake. It was a resort area, and my dad worked for the Boy Scout reservation down there. And I had gone down there, and I had been invited to deer hunt just near there. It's all swamp and thick timber. I didn't have a clue where to go, and it was a late evening hunt, and I just walked in until I found a place that looked suited, and I sat down in a treetop towards the end. I had plenty of view, and I was ready for a deer. I'm sitting there for a while, and all of a sudden I got a really creepy feeling. Now I'm at full attention. I'm sober. I'm vigilant. I'm looking for a deer. I'm not looking for an enemy. But I just had this weird feeling that something wasn't right. And I turned around just a little bit, and right there, literally about 5 foot from me, I was face to face with a very large bobcat. That bobcat evidently had come up and saw something that was different, some movement, and it was hunting me, seeking me, and it was ready to bounce. But when it turned around and it realized it was a human, and it took off, and I was glad. But guess what? I got up and I went to my car. I was done hunting. The other time was in Belize. I was doing a conference, and I can't remember which village it was. It was a Mayan village, either Mayan Mopan or Quechua village, but I was actually training some church leaders, and we had been doing that during the day. When we first started, the pastor of that village had shared with me that he had shared it as a prayer request that we, the men and the leaders there, would pray that God would take care of their jaguar problem. Because a jaguar had become very bold and was coming into their village in the middle of the day, grabbing chickens and dogs and running off. And they were terrified of him coming in and getting one of their babies, because see, the children would just lay outside and play, and they were afraid of that. We had prayed that morning. It came time for lunch, and we took a break. The other men all went to their home, and the pastor invited me to his home. Now this village is, they don't have lawnmowers. There's not streets. It's not lawn cared. Everything was pretty much thick, fruit trees, grown up. And we're walking down a dirt path that's probably no larger than 5 or 6 foot across. And we're walking down it, and we're almost at his home. And it's middle of the day. And literally about 20 or 30 yards in front of us, the jaguar steps out. Now, I don't mean he just sticks his head out. His whole body is in front of us. And he's standing broadside with his head looking at us, and he is staring down. There is no sign of fear with this jaguar. Now, the beautiful thing was, and there's a name for this, and I can't remember it. He was a black jaguar. Now, you could see his spots still through the blackness, but he was what we would call a panther. They have another name for it, but he was a black jaguar. They're huge. I mean huge. Beautiful animal, very powerful animal, and there he is. And the pastor says to me, the Mayan pastor says, "Do not move." Well, I had already been thinking about running and then getting out of there, but he says, "Do not move. Stand still. Do not take your eyes off of him." And so here we are, what seemed like an eternity, staring this jaguar down. The jaguar does not run. The jaguar simply steps off the trail, goes into the bush, and is gone. My pastor friend says, "Run!" And we ran to his house. And I don't know really whatever happened with the jaguar, but I'm telling you, I remember that jaguar. I doubt if he remembers me. The third time was in Canada. I was up there for a moose hunt, and this was all wilderness area, monster acreage of property, what they call providential land, or what we would call federal land. And it's late in the evening. I am walking down the trail trying to come out of this thick stuff. It is just where I can just barely see. And I look up in front of me, probably about 50 or 60 yards, and I see something moving in the trail in my direction. I cannot tell what it is. I throw up my gun, look through the scope. I still can't tell, but it's getting closer and closer. There's not really any place to run. The woods are thick. There's not any tree to climb. And pretty soon I realized that it was a lynx, a big lynx. I don't know, that was the first time I had ever seen a lynx, other than probably in a zoo. And it's walking towards me. And about the time I realize what it is, it stops and sits down between me and where I want to go. And it's just staring at me. Well, I had already been told, whatever I do, don't shoot a lynx. At that particular time, that was major no-no. I waited and waited for what was forever for that lynx to go away. It was one of the creepiest feelings. The next day on the same trail in the morning, I'm walking in on that same trail in pitch dark, headed for the area where I had seen some moose sign where I was planning on hunting for the day. And I'm almost there. It's dark, and I'm hearing something on each side of the trail in the timber, breaking branches. I don't know what it is, but it's following me on both sides, literally on both sides of me, following me. About that time, an elk bugles. When that elk bugles, wolves, not coyotes, wolves. A pack of wolves has been hunting me on both sides in the dark, and they began to sound off to the bugle of the elk. I turned that night into day. I turned my light on, backed up against the biggest tree I could, got my rifle ready, and I was like that the rest of the morning until daylight. I was terrified for what was hunting me. The other time was actually here in Tennessee on my own property, or actually the property that borders me. I had killed or shot a deer. It had crossed the fence. I had permission to go across the fence to retrieve, but I could not take my gun, and I could not hunt on the other side. So I looked over, set my gun down, looked over the fence, followed the blood trail, and saw the deer was still there, but it wasn't dead. So I went back to the house. Went back to the house, left my gun there, waited a while, and I went back. When I got down to where that deer was and looked down, I saw movement, but it wasn't the deer. There were several coyotes down there walking around the carcass. The deer had died, and they had decided that it was theirs. I had left my rifle at the house because I wasn't supposed to have a gun on this property. And so I began to yell and scream. But the coyotes evidently are hungry. They would run off a little bit. As I went down and started working on the deer, they kept getting closer and closer until finally they're literally walking around me. They are not afraid of me. Of all the animals that I've described, that probably scared me more. As you can tell, I survived. I got out. But I want you to know you will not survive. You will not survive the lion, the roaring lion, Satan. If you do not stay sober, very alert, constantly looking, if you do not stand still and resist him and stand steadfast, you will not survive that enemy. For he is a greater hunter than any other hunters around. And he has one purpose: to take you captive, to devour you. Be very, very careful, my friend. Don't let your guard down. He will choose that moment to make his attack. I love you, Stewart's Chapel. Amen.